Osamu Tezuka. If you are an anime or manga fan and you never heard of this name or recognize that face, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. I don't care how many episodes of One Piece you watch a day or what is installed on your PC. Not knowing who this man was is like being a Batman fan and not knowing who Bill Finger was. On to the main topic. In 1963, the United States was introduced to Tetsuwan Atom, or Astro Boy as it was known there. The English dub was licensed and produced by NBC Enterprises under the guidance of Fred Ladd. Fred Ladd was one of the first to introduce Japanese animation to North America, and he had a close relationship with Tezuka. Not really, but I like to think that way. A moment of appreciation to this man. The anime industry as we know it today may not have been the same without him. By 1964-ish, Astro Boy was a big hit. Naturally, Fred Ladd wanted something new from Tezuka to capitalize on this new technological achievement that was known at the time as color television. And Tezuka had the perfect choice to be the first colored anime in history. His epic series titled Jungle Emperor, a story about a white lion who grows up with the responsibility of ruling his jungle and making peace with humans in an epic tale of hardships. And being in color would be perfect to represent this special lion among other animals instead of differentiating him by his pants. Fred Ladd liked that idea. However, there was a catch. The first thing requested was to make it kid-friendly. While Tezuka's storylines tend to be cartoony and appear kid-friendly, the man wrote some of the most profound and most depressing stories in his career that spanned for over 700 comics. Jungle Emperor was not exempt from that, as it had some subjects that were too mature for the American child to understand. Like some key characters being former Nazis who watched over future Holocaust victims. A bit too soon at the time, don't you think? The second request was to give the show a negative continuity. That means no plot progression, no long-standing story arcs, nothing. Just one story for an episode, and act like nothing happened by the next one. This episodic format was done to make it simpler for syndication and allow everyone to tune in without questioning what happened last time. The third request was to keep Leo a child, never let him grow up. Not surprising considering they requested to have no continuity here. And fourth, cutting the episode number from the planned 78 episodes to 52. Now this was not the first time Tezuka has disagreed with American standards, and he made a comic complaining about what he sees as hypocrisy when an episode of Astro Boy was cut due to what was considered graphic content, which was simply a dog getting operated on to turn to a cyborg dog. Tezuka was really against the suggestion of leaving Leo a cub, since to him it took the most important aspect of the story, but unfortunately this time, he had to agree with these demands if he wanted to make his series a reality. Japan hadn't switched to color broadcast yet. His studio, Mushin Production, was not equipped to produce color content and didn't have the budget to convert the studio to do so. In the end, NBC agreed to sponsor Tezuka's project if he agreed to their demands and supported his studio with the required equipment. Let's talk about the name for a sec. The original title is Jungle Emperor. That's it. Jungle Emperor, or Jungle Taite, not Jungle Emperor Leo. Jungle Emperor Leo is the title used for the 1997 movie, but it has been used to refer to the franchise later on. Why did they change it to Kimba the White Lion? The MGM Lion. Seriously. The name Kimba is derived from Simba, which means lion in Swahili. So it's not Simba who ripped off Kimba's name, it was the other way around. It also makes Mufasa look like a lazy idiot for literally naming his son Lion. The anime first aired in Japan on Fuji TV from October 6, 1965 to September 28, 1966, and it was indeed the first colored anime in history. The American version was dubbed by Titan Productions, which sadly couldn't find much info about them due to lack of a Wikipedia article and not much to say about them in IMDb. The American broadcast first started on September 11, 1966, and lasted till September 3rd, 1967. And it was another hit there. The license for the series expired on September 30th, 1978 due to Mushi Production going bankrupt 5 years prior, and that also led to Titan Productions' dub being unavailable for broadcast. For years, the legal status of this series was in limbo until Canadian company Zaza Sound Production Limited won the rights in 1993 and redubbed the series using Canadian voice actors and a much faithful script.
Kimba, the white lion, he's the bravest little guy in the land.
Although the reception was lukewarm for that dub, with some criticism includes lackluster performance with different music and other edits. Some of the redubbed episodes were released on VHS by UAV Corporation. And if you follow Phalos and the movies, then you probably heard of that name. Anyway, UAV released a limited amount of the episodes under the title Kimba the Lion Prince, and for a while, it seemed like that was the only version available to watch. Luckily, by 2005, Australian company Madman Entertainment and American company Right Stuff International were able to release the original dub on DVD, so all was not lost. Going back to 1966 a bit, Jungle Emperor was enough of a success that Tezuka was able to get the budget that he needed to make a follow-up sequel, so this time there was no need for American input over his work. The sequel, now titled New Jungle Emperor Move Forward Leo, chronicles the life of adult Leo and his family, and it ran for 26 episodes from October 5th, 1966 to March 29th, 1967. And since it didn't have involvement from NBC like last time, the tone was a bit darker and more mature than the original series, and you can see that if you compare the fight scenes. Despite the change of the tone, the ending was changed to make it on a happier tone than the sad manga ending. On the American side, since the franchise was in the aforementioned legal limbo, NBC was not able to get the distribution rights, and this time it was handled by Christian Broadcasting Network, or CBN for short. Yeah, I know, NBC, CBN, it's confusing. It was aired from 1984 to 1985, with the dub being handled by Florida company Sonic Sound International Corporation. Because this was a different company from last time, there was some debate if they wanted to keep the original names from the previous dub for the sake of continuity, or use the original Japanese names. In the end, they used Leo and made Kimba a nickname with an explanation behind the mix-up. Also, this dub wasn't as memorable for taking many liberties and going with whatever script they had, so in the end, this wasn't as fondly remembered as the first series. Now, some of you might ask, where is the manga out of all this? The manga is available in French, German, Italian, Portuguese, and Taiwanese, but not in English. Why is that? Are there legal rights issues that prevents an American license? The answer is simple. It was Tezuka Productions' decision to not release it in the West. Why do you ask? To make it short, blackface. Yeah, this is why they're afraid to release it in the US. They were okay with keeping the Nazi references for European releases, but blackfaces were a much bigger issue. I mean, look at it. They look too cartoony compared to the other characters. They look like they belong in a goofy cartoon than the rest here. But yeah, you thought DOA Extreme Volleyball 3 was the first of that case? Well, you guessed wrong, as this issue was older than that. They didn't have issue with the Ghibli release since that was intended for the Japanese readers, but unless they release a disclaimer explaining that it's a product of its time like the Looney Tunes, or edit the artwork, don't expect it to be released soon. At least the depiction of Africans in the anime wasn't as cartoony as the manga. Almost. Now this is the part where I end this section and move on to the history of the Lion King, But I thought I'd share to you the history of the franchise of this region and my personal experience with it. In the Middle East, the history of the franchise is a bit interesting. Jungle Emperor was one of the earliest anime to be adapted to Arabic, but unlike something like Captain Tsubasa, Future Boy Conan, or UFO Robo Grandizer, who became pop culture icons to this day, Jungle Emperor ended more like a cult anime. It is recognized as an old-school anime, but not as famous. It's also like the Dragon Ball situation in America, where the adult version is the iconic version instead of the child version. The first version was for adult Leo, and it was titled Hikayat Layth al-Abyad, or Tales of the White Lion. No, seriously, that's how they named it. Tales... of the White Lion. The first dub was done by the Middle East Television Studios and distributed by the Arabian Media Production at Riyadh KSA. This version had some names changed to Arabic, but the script is based on the Japanese version, with the most obvious evidence being the opening theme being based on the Japanese ending song of the first series, Leo's Song. Sadly, this version from before my time, and I didn't get to watch it on TV, so I have no memories of it. But I gotta say, I love the voice acting of this version. It feels majestic.
اسمع يا سامر، أنا أريد أن تعدني بشيء.
ما هو يا ليث؟
الوعد ألا تقول لأحد عن غابتنا إلا
من؟
إلا للأطفال الصغار، لأن الأطفال الصغار يحبون الحيوانات ولا يؤذونها، ونحن نرحب بالأطفال ليلعبوا دائما معنا في غابتنا.
The second version was the Young Leo, and it was titled Al-Ghaba Al-Sa'ida, or The Happy Jungle. This dub was by the Lebanese Across the East Studios and distributed by the Rakti Art Production and Distribution from Abu Dhabi, UAE. This one was a bit confusing to tell which dub it's based on, since they use the name Kimba, Polly, Bucky, and Danny, and other American dub names, but they also use Panja, or Panga as they say it, instead of Caesar, and Boo Boo instead of Claw. The conclusion I came from this is this version is based on the second dub, which does make sense since the original was still under legal limbo until 2005.
Who is this strange creature at our meeting?
I'm here for the first time, Your Majesty.
I asked you who you are.
Excuse me, Kimba's my name. Son of Caesar, the White Lion.
You don't look familiar. Who are you?
Hello, my name is Kimba.
I didn't mean your name.
Oh, I'm the son of a white lion named Panja.
أنت لست مألوفا لدي، من أنت؟
مرحبا، أنا اسمي كيمبا.
لم أقصد اسمك.
أنا ابن ليث أبيض اسمه بانجا.
This one was my first exposure to the Jungle Emperor and my introduction to the franchise after watching The Lion King, and where most of my memories of this series came from. The third version was the second adult Leo dub, and it was titled Mughamarat Leo, or Leo's Adventures. This dub was by the Jordanian Al-Unud Studios and was distributed by the Arabian Media and Public Relationship Group from Abu Dhabi, UAE. Just like the previous version, this dub uses the American names.
人間の言葉少し話せる。名前は
Do you realize you've picked a rather dangerous part of the jungle to go for a walk? Who are you?
Christopher Sugi.
ألم تجد مكانا أقل خطرا من الغابة حتى تتنزه فيه؟ ومن أنت؟
Christopher Sugi.
This one I also did watch some episodes, but I don't recall being that fond of it. The fourth version was the second dub of Little Leo and was titled Mughamarat Layth al-Abyad, or Adventures of the White Lion. This dub was by the Lebanese studio City Arts Production and distributed by the unimpressively named Studio Productions. What, you ran out of names? Just like last time, this one was also based on the Canadian dub based on the names. However, this one stands out by changing Leo's name to Booga.
It's me, Booga.
Booga.
Booga?
Booga. Booga. Booga.
Why? How? I don't know. Anyway, it's thanks to that name change is why I know it exists. Despite that, I didn't really watch it beyond an episode or two and hated the name change, voice acting, and the lackluster theme music. And while doing this research, I also found out there was a fifth dub I wasn't aware of. This dub is interesting to say the least. This was made during a phase when many dub companies would pick random cartoons and anime and repurpose them to be more religious or heavy on moral teaching, and zero music. These religious dubs tend to be released on VHS/home releases or get picked up for religious channels because they needed something to attract children to watch them. So while I did not watch this version, I know exactly where it came from due to personally experiencing that phase. Wonder if they're still doing it. This version is titled Ward al-Ghaba, or Rose of the Jungle, and listening to this ear rape of a song, you can tell the target audience for this thing.
أسد الغابة وهو البطل في أمر القوة منشغل. أسد الغابة وهو البطل.
This odd sheep of the bunch is dubbed by Jordanian studio Al-Bashar International Entertainment Productions Institute and distributed by Anas Productions. Don't even go there. And the dub voices here are...
أتيت إلى هنا؟
أبعد عن جدي.
تبحث عنه وحدك؟
That tone with that face. It just makes this Leo sound like a predator, for lack of a better word. Ooh, you're alone, huh? Why don't you come with me? You'll be safe with me. Which is ironic coming from something that was made to spread religious teachings. Somehow. The sad thing about these dubs is most of them get lost with time, so we don't have a solid archive for them to be preserved for the future. Most of the old dubs are available today thanks to fans who either collected what available home releases at the time or taped them from TV and had the technology to convert them to digital format. The more popular ones can be easily available, but these old ones and obscure titles are harder to come across. Now let's move on to the history of the Lion King. I'm gonna assume most of you know the background already, but I'll pretend there are those who don't know. In 1989, Disney entered what was known at the time as the Disney Renaissance, which lasted until 1999, the era that started with The Little Mermaid and gave us some of the most iconic Disney animated movies of all times. However, The Lion King started development a year earlier, in 1988. Wow, so the development was as old as I am. The idea first came during a meeting between the chairman of the time, Jeffrey Katzenberg, along with Roy E. Disney and Peter Schneider when they were promoting Oliver and Company in Europe. George Schrebner, the director of Oliver and Company, was assigned to direct The Lion King, and he envisioned the movie to be an animated documentary. Katzenberg liked his concept and he wanted to add a coming-of-age and death story, and later went into development with Walt Disney Feature Animation's Vice President for Creative Affairs, Charlie Fink. Production began in 1990. Like many movies, the initial concept was very different from the final version. The initial script, written by Linda Wolverton and Thomas M. Dish, who were assigned to this project early on, went under titles such as King of the Kalahari, later changed to King of the Beasts, then King of the Jungle. The initial two screenplays were released to public in 2012, revealing their titles and synopsis. The first version, titled King of the Beasts, was also known as The Lion King as an alternative title, and was made in January 1990, while the second King of the Beasts version was made in May of the same year. The initial plot involved a war between the lions, led by Mufasa, and the baboons, led by Scar, with the hyenas as secondary villains, with almost every character playing different roles from their final version, with many others getting scrapped from production. The second version changed the plot from the war between the lions and baboons to a war between two lion prides. This concept would be later used for The Lion King to Simba's Pride with the war between Pridelanders and Outlanders, but not as gritty as the original concept. Following the script, the crew was joined by Roger Allers, who brought with him Brenda Chapman to work as the head writer, and later character designer Chris Sanders and Thomas Schumacher as the producer. The full details of the initial scripts and concept art can be found in the Lion King and Disney wikis if you want to take your time reading them. But one concept art stood out among many. This one. If you've seen a rip-off article, then you probably came upon this concept art that shows a white lion cub playing with a butterfly. This is a bit tricky to tell. This concept was made with King of the Jungle screenplay when it was still far from the end result or any similarities were present with Jungle Emperor, and this is the only one that shows a white lion. Every other concept art shows tan lions and no white one in persons. The only explanation I could come up with to explain this one is they either didn't color the cub or it was an effect of the light shining on him. There's also this character concept art, but this is not for who would end up as Simba. This is for a character named Mito, who was going to be the brother of Nadra, later changed to Nala, but later scrapped from the final movie. While Mito is shown to be white here, that's only because this is an uncolored artwork and he was shown in other samples in color like the rest of the lions. But other than that, no white lines mentioned in the script nor in any other concept artwork. Following the initial scripting, the crew went to Africa on November 1991. Everything was going fine, until 6 months later where things got complicated with clashes of ideas. George Scribner wanted to make his animated National Geographic documentary-style movie focusing on the nature aspect, but Alice and the producers were determined to turn the movie to an animated musical. Might be because Scribner's vision was too violent and incest-heavy, making it not child-friendly for Disney. And because I know people will bring it up if I don't mention this, while Disney wanted to make The Lion King, they didn't see it as their top priority. Instead, they wanted to focus on Pocahontas, thinking it was going to be the next big hit following The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, and Aladdin.
Pretty much everybody at the studio decided they didn't want to work on Lion King. Everybody decided that they'd rather work on Pocahontas, and then we literally had to beg and scrape.
Would you please animate on our movie?
Yeah.
They were counting on another story of human romance with princesses and didn't put much faith on the story of talking animals, which is why they assigned the B team to The Lion King instead of the top animators, who ended up working on Pocahontas, the movie that didn't break the records as they hoped it would. I'll leave the irony sit in for a moment. Sadly, Scribner couldn't agree with the new decisions and he left the project and he was replaced with Rob Minkoff, with Don Hahn joining the production following Schumacher's promotion to Vice President of Development for Future Animation. Following this change of staff, Hahn took over to rewrite and retool the script because he found it unfocused and lacked a clear theme, which then led to the choice of growing up and facing the realities of the world. Later on, Hahn, Minkoff, Chapman, and Allers refined this idea along with screenwriters Irene Michie and Jonathan Roberts, who took charge of the revision process, fixing unresolved emotional issues in the script. This is also where the title was settled with The Lion King, because they remembered that lions don't live in the jungle, and from then on, work went normally. The first trailer was dropped in theaters in November 1993 and met with huge enthusiasm for the movie. And after 11 test screenings, we got the movie that we ended up getting in June 15th, 1994. And despite the massive success at the box office and accolades, not everyone was happy with what they saw.
One of the reasons why The Lion King worked was that it was a good collaboration.
Hello, darling.
Wasn't an American story or an African story. It's a kind of mythological tale set on animals, which means it's almost like a fable that would speak to every single culture.
One thing Disney had advertised about this movie, that it was an original story. Unlike many of the majority of Disney's animated features, The Lion King was not based on a fairy tale or a previously established work. Instead, It was seen as a mixture of the biblical stories of Moses and Joseph, along with the William Shakespeare's Hamlet and Disney's Bambi, but it wasn't a direct adaptation like The Prince of Egypt, for an example.
Tonight, we're proud to present the most successful film in the history of the Walt Disney Studios in its television network debut, The Lion King. Hello, I'm Michael Eisner, head of the Walt Disney Company. The Lion King is unique. Unlike our other Disney animated features, The Lion King is not based on any previously published fairy tale or literary work. It's an original concept that was developed in the story department of Disney Animation. And like most Disney animated features, it took years to create and refine. More than 1 million drawings were created for The Lion King. And we're particularly proud of the Academy Award-winning music of the great Elton John and Tim Rice. Relax, Simba. We'll get to Lion King in a moment. Enjoy tonight's very special movie. I know Simba will.
But many people didn't buy this. Who were they? The Jungle Emperor crowd. The crowd who grew up with the 60s dub, the crowd who happened to watch the 93 Canadian dub, and the crowd who watched it in Japan. They saw the movie, and they didn't help but notice many similarities to what they were familiar with. It then started to get the reputation of being a ripoff and accused of plagiarism. The most famous of these accusations was Matthew Broderick, who voiced adult Simba, claiming that he was under the impression that he was working on a Kimba remake since he was familiar with the series since childhood. This claim is referenced in the book titled Disney, The Mouse Betrayed, Greed, Corruption, and Children at Risk by Peter and Rachel Schweizer, Chapter 11 titled The Lion King. There's also a quote from Billy Lowat, the original Kimba and Astro Boy voice actress, dating back to an interview from 1995 by Irish broadcaster Martin King, in which she said the following: "There is no doubt in my mind that The Lion King is a copy of Kimba. I believe that someone may have, as a child, seen Kimba and innocently tucked that thought away. But there are too many similarities. The baboon is Daniel Baboon, his father in the sky watching over him. You know, Kimba's original name was Simba, but we changed it. What made me angry was when I saw Roy Disney, who said that he was so proud that Lion King was their first original story, not based on a fairy tale or other material. It made me mad." Ignoring some things Billy Lowat got wrong on what she worked on 30 years ago, one thing for sure was the people supporting this plagiarism claim were very vocal ever since the premiere of the movie. It was obvious that George Schreiber's vision was vastly different in the earlier stages, so the problem now is the Roger Allers version that replaced it, who he obviously denied every claim of plagiarism that came to his attention, claiming that he had no familiarity with Kimba and had no mention of it in any meeting or discussion regarding the movie in its development stages. A claim shared by co-director Rob Minkoff, who used the excuse of it being in Africa and it would be natural to have the same setting and animals. However, some sources claim that Allers had previously lived in Tokyo and worked in animation there during the 1980s when Tezuka was still alive and well known at the time, and the remake of Jungle Emperor was airing at the time. Though I have suspicion regarding this claim, since it didn't specify the exact year he worked there, and the earliest sign of development of the movie was back in Europe 1988, while Jungle Emperor remake first aired in Japan in 1989. Fred Ladd, who we mentioned at the start of the video, who worked directly with Tezuka to bring Jungle Emperor to the States, did not buy Allers and Minkoff's ignorance of the series. In the book, Astro Boy and Anime Come to the Americas, an insider's view of the birth of a pop culture phenomenon, Fred Ladd stated that there was at least one animator who was an avid Kimba fan and he didn't like what Disney had done. Animators Tom Cito and Mark Kozler, who both have story credits, have admitted watching Kimba in the 60s and assumed many of the crew did. However, Cito insisted there was no mention of Kimba during production, while Kozler mentioned Disney's Bambi as being their reference during development. Of course, this is from the American side, but what about the Japanese side? To no one's surprise, they didn't like what they saw either. The movie drew a protest in Japan with 488 Japanese cartoonists and animators, led by shoujo manga author Machiko Satonaka, signed a petition accusing Disney of plagiarism and demanded that they give due credit to Tezuka. One rumor spreading at the time was Disney silencing Mushi Productions with money. However, They assured that it was a baseless rumor and stated that Osamu Tezuka was a great fan of Disney who made his own version of Bambi, Pinocchio, and 101 Dalmatians in honor of the studio nonetheless, and would be honored that one of his famous works would inspire them to make their own version the same way he did. And they even went away to not sue Disney over their movie, saying that they are one small studio against one gargantuan entity, and they didn't think it was worth the trouble. Nonetheless, this stigma remains to this day. Even after having the original series readily available to purchase, the public is still unaware of the truth and who to believe. So let's put aside the production issues and look at the final product itself. Is it really a one-to-one ripoff, or is it different enough to stand on its own? I'll see you next time when we delve to the actual story of the two franchises.